Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Don K.Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is what I call my morning musings. We are currently doing a somewhat brief study of the book of Zechariah, sometimes called a minor prophet, but as I've said before, nothing minor about Zechariah. Now, today's installment is going to be a little bit different. I just want to introduce to you what I call the paradoxes of the book of Zechariah. You see, the book of Zechariah contains some elements, some statements, that if we do not look real carefully at them, they might appear to be, guess what? Contradictions. Let me illustrate that. Back in chapter 9, it talks about the coming of the king who would come riding a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Here is the coming of the king almost in ignominy, humble. I mean, after all, riding a colt is not coming in power and glory. We're reminded of Isaiah chapter 42 that Messiah would come. A bruised reed shall he not break, a smoking flax shall he not quench. So here we have the coming of the Lord in humility, but in other places here in Zechariah, we have the coming of the Lord in fury and power and, just in conquering. Likewise, a second paradox. In other words, the first paradox being the coming of the king in humility versus the coming of the king in power and great glory. The second paradox, notice here in chapter 9, the Lord says, I'm going to make the battle horse to disappear from Jerusalem. I'll take the battle bow away. I'm going to speak peace. So he is talking about the coming of the Lord to bring peace. Well, strangely enough, in chapter 10, he said, I'm going to make the house of Judah his royal horse of battle. I'm going to make Judah my battle bow. Oh, wait a minute. You just said I'm going to bring peace. Now you're turning around and saying, I'm going to bring war. Another paradox to be found in the book of Zechariah is that on the one hand, the Lord says over here in chapter 10, verses 10 and following, I'm going to destroy Assyria and Egypt. By the way, Assyria and Egypt at this time were ultra minor players on the geopolitical military scene. But he says, I'm going to destroy Assyria and Egypt. Many scholars believe what we have here is a metaphoric reference and use of Egypt and Assyria. But he says, I'm going to destroy them. Well, earlier, the Lord had said that he's going to bring many nations, inclusive of Assyria and Egypt, and I'm going to bring them to Jerusalem, and I'm going to make them to be my people. Earlier in the book, the Lord says he's coming back to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem would be a joy. Jerusalem would be glorified. But in the last part of the book, Jerusalem would be destroyed. Do you see what I mean by the paradoxes? And there are others. These are just a few, however, of the paradoxes to be found in the book of Zechariah. On the one hand, he seems to speak of the desolation and destruction. He seems to speak of peace, then he speaks of war, he speaks of humility, and then he speaks of conquering. There are, in fact, two aspects of the work of Messiah at work in the book of Zechariah. There are, in fact, two Jerusalems, two fates for, quote, Jerusalem. There are two fates for the nations. In my book, Who is This Babylon?, I develop extensively the paradoxes in the book of Zechariah in regard especially to the two Jerusalems. On the one hand, Zechariah says Jerusalem would be destroyed. On the other hand, Zechariah says Jerusalem would be glorified. Contradiction? No, there are two Jerusalems in the book of Zechariah. One is the earthly, the old covenant Jerusalem. The other is the heavenly Zion. And again, I developed that extensively in my book, Who is This Babylon? Go to my website, www.eschatology.org or BibleProphecy.com. Order the book, enter the code 7070, and you'll not be charged shipping. You really, really need to see how the paradoxes in the book of Zechariah present to us the story of the destruction of Old Covenant Jerusalem, the glorification of New Covenant Jerusalem, the coming of Messiah in humility versus the coming of Messiah in glory and power and in judgment. And on the one hand, the destruction of the enemies of God, i.e., the, quote, nations, Assyria and Egypt, versus the invitation of all nations to become God's people. Oh, this is good stuff. Hey, get the book, Who is This Babylon? You'll be amazed at what you see. Thanks for joining me on this morning's Morning Musings. We got a whole lot more from this wonderful book of Zechariah, so we'll see you on the flip side.